Goldman Sachs. We've heard all the story, you probably have heard the story about Goldman Sachs was buying CDS also from AIG. And they didn't stop buying from AIG. Okay. They sold CDS to their clients. Goldman Sachs was acting as a dealer in credit default swaps. Probably they also wasn't complete matched book, okay? That they were short credit risk when it mattered, but they were acting as a dealer here, and AIG had CDS here and capital here. This was the same kind of CDS we were talking about with UBS, meaning it was like triple on high-rated securities and so forth. So when there was this fluctuation that I showed, I shouldn't have erased that before, okay, and the CDS came into the money, okay, what that means is there's a contingent liability of AIG. When it's written, at the moment it's written, it has zero value. That's the nature of a swap. But when it comes into the money, okay, let's say that's plus 30 billion there. Okay. That liability, that contingent liability comes into the money, and it's $30 billion for Goldman Sachs and $30 billion for AIG. Negative. Goldman Sachs had written these contracts, though, so that if AIG's credit rating dropped below AAA, it would have to start putting up margin on its CDS positions. And that's exactly what happened, okay, because Moody's downgraded AIG. And so this $30 billion had to be paid to Goldman. It wasn't just a mark. It wasn't, you owe me $30 billion. No, it's you pay me $30 billion. Okay. It wasn't just a due to, like in case if these bonds, this is the point, okay. You would think this is insurance only if these bonds default. Okay, are we going to be in trouble? This is what AIG was sort of thinking. This is AAA. They're never going to default. You know, this is picking up nickels. You know, if we're taking no risk at all. Said the head of the portion of AIG that made this bet. Okay, he said there's no chance in the world that these things will ever lose even a nickel. Okay, because and what did he mean by that? What he meant was that there's not going to be any defaults, okay? But you don't have to have default. If there's fluctuation in value of these CDSs and you have to pay $30 billion to Goldman Sachs, you can go bankrupt even if there's never any defaults, okay? And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. I'm showing this, you know, you might have heard, you know, if you're reading Neil Borofsky's book for the final exam, you'll have read something about this. He wrote a fabulous report about AIG. He's concerned about the fact that Goldman basically, and not just Goldman, but Société Générale in France was even bigger in this regard. Basically, together, they sucked all the capital out of AIG, okay? And it was just going to be insolvent, okay? And so the government stepped in and said, okay, we now own AIG. They took an 80% position in that. And there's the question, well, what should we do about this $30 billion that's sitting on the balance sheet of Goldman Sachs? Should the government have taken it back or whatever? The point is that Goldman already has it. It's already been transferred to Goldman as payment for mark to market. Possibly you could have clawed it back. But look at the other side. Goldman Sachs is acting as a market maker to some extent anyway. And that means, if they're a matched book, okay, they have offsetting liabilities, okay? So if you take, it's not as if they've made a $30 billion profit, okay, necessarily, because if they had positions on the other side, they've made a $30 billion loss also, okay? And that was there to hedge these positions here, okay? Okay. So it's not quite so easy as that, okay? If Goldman, to the extent that Goldman is acting as a market maker, taking away 30 billion here means taking away 30 billion here too, okay? They're not going to be able to pay their clients, and so the whole thing starts to come unraveled. I don't say that Geithner necessarily did the right thing in letting them get off scot-free, but you can sort of see it's not quite so easy as somehow we let Goldman survive with a 30 billion profit that they didn't earn. We paid them at full value. That's the point of a CDS. The whole point of a CDS, okay, is that when the corporate bond goes south, you replace it with a treasury bond, okay? That's the whole point of a CDS. This is another case in which these details about payments, details about liquidity, had enormous consequences. The fact that AIG contracted to put up margin, that they contracted to make payments, is what killed them. Okay? There were other people writing CDS that didn't agree to do that. Okay? Many of the monoline insurers did not agree to do that. And so, yeah, it's true that the mark went against them, but they didn't have to pay anything. And so they didn't have to. Liquidity kills you quick. Insolvency, you can survive for a long time being insolvent, as long as you can continue paying your bills. Okay? But liquidity kills you quick. And it killed AIG 2 or 3 days after Lehman failed in September 2008. AIG was the anchor of this entire system, writing these CDSs on AAA. And when AIG was pulled out, okay, that's when the system went into free fall. Okay, that's what Neil Barofsky was up against. That's what he was trying to understand. I'm not sure that there was fraud here. Okay, I'm not sure that there was fraud in the UBS example. Okay, that's what makes these cases interesting to me. Okay, there's not fraud. There's a kind of systematic misunderstanding of risk. That they're imagining that there's an risk-free arbitrage that we're doing. Okay. And because it's risk-free, we're going to bet the bank on it because there's no risk there. So let's just do more of it. And if we've done 10 trillion, it's even better to do 100 trillion, because it's picking up free money. And I think the lesson of both of these cases is if it looks like free money, look again. And look again with money view perspective, okay? Is there a liquidity risk here that's not being priced? Is this arbitrage basically just a liquidity premium that you think should be zero, okay, and is not zero, okay? And so in trying to do this arbitrage, you're taking on liquidity risk without realizing it. You think that you're picking up free money. In fact, you are becoming the lender of last resort to the entire system, and you are not a central bank. You cannot print money. And so when it comes down to it, you have to be bailed out by the central bank. Yes?
Do you think it's possible that they actually did see that there was a risk to what they were doing, with the potential of the government coming in, it was worth it for them to make these relatively safe profits, even though that there was this low probability, like very bad event that could happen?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the question. Maybe there's a moral hazard thing going on here that they're basically saying we'll take this risk because if the end of the world comes, the government will bail us out. Okay, I think it's that there is always some calculation like that, but I think in these two cases, the surprise, I think they were surprised. I think they were surprised. The person who, the person in this picture, okay, who I think was really depending on the government, okay, was in a way Goldman Sachs, not AIG, okay, because they're depending on, they chose AIG as their counterparty, okay. Remember I said UBS found AIG to be too expensive, okay, and they were more expensive. Goldman Sachs chose AIG. They were willing to pay that extra expense. And why? Because AIG was willing to say, if our credit rate drops, we will pay you margin. And also, AIG was a huge company with a huge capital basis. AIG thought it was taking no risk. AIG put no reserves against these credit default swaps. Okay? It also booked profits. It thought it was selling insurance against something that would never happen. So every time it sold one, bonuses went out to the people who sold it. Okay? So nobody's reserving against anything. Nobody thinks they're taking any risk at all. Okay? And they learned, eventually, they came to understand what they were doing, but by the time they did it, they already had huge positions, okay? And certainly they can't unwind these positions. Who's gonna buy these positions from you? So they were kind of stuck. And so then Goldman Sachs, then they had to start paying Goldman Sachs billions of dollars. I think Goldman Sachs probably even didn't, they chose the right counterparty. That's clear, okay, that the government couldn't let AIG fail because it would mean that a lot of people who think they have fire insurance no longer have fire insurance. Okay, and this is an international company with exposures everywhere. So they chose the right counterparty. That's pretty clear. But I doubt, really, seriously, that they thought that this was going to destroy AIG, because then they're not the right counterparty. You don't really want a counterparty who's going to die in order to, because you want somebody who can absorb this loss, okay? And AIG could not absorb this loss. It was too big. Now we have a couple of questions up at the top, and then you, yeah.
Post-margin, for the ones that didn't post-margin, like what would trigger them to have to pay? Because like if the mortgages are defaulting, like do the CDS just appreciate in value? And when do they actually have to get paid out if they don't have to pay margin?
Well, this is, okay, we haven't gone through exactly how CDOs work with mortgages and so forth. So let's just pull back and be a little more abstract. A CDS can be written such that the fluctuation, it's these two things. It's these coupon payments, okay, and then there's this final payment if there's default, okay? The question is whether, when this package fluctuates in value, okay, does any cash change hands? Okay, that's the issue of margin. Okay, this U% thing, okay, can continue to flow, okay, even if there's no margin going on. The monolines would not put up margin, and so the only time there would be a big payment for the monolines is if there's actual default here. Then you have to really make a huge payment. Okay. In most cases, there never was that. These were AAA tranches. There was a lot of tranches underneath to absorb the fluctuation in value. They didn't. It was not default that caused this problem. It was fluctuation in the value of the CDS that caused this problem. There were eventually some defaults of subprime mortgages, but that wasn't what caused the problem. And in fact, this is why many people underestimated how big the problem was going to be, because they said to themselves, even if all the subprime mortgages in the world collapse, there's just not a lot of them out there, okay? And you can absorb we can absorb those losses. But they didn't appreciate how this whole thing was connected, the leverage that was going on, the liquidity issues that were going on, how it was embedded in world money markets and capital markets. All of that was not. You can't just look through that stuff and say, there's hardly any of it there. Well, there's enough of it to cause lots of trouble because it's all concentrated. The people who thought they were taking no risk took a lot of no risk. Okay, and so they are just, and they put no reserves against this at all, and so they're very exposed. The people who took the low tranches, who knew they were taking risk, mostly survived. Mostly survived. It was the people who thought they were not taking risk who failed.